in the world of technology came from none other than iPhone maker Apple. And after over 15 years as the head of Apple, CEO Tim Cook has announced that he will be handing over the reins of the company to John Ternus, who is presently the Senior Vice President of Hardware Engineering at the headquarters in USA. Now, John Ternus will take over Apple in September this year. He's a 25-year Apple veteran who joined the company back in 2001. Now, John Ternus led hardware engineering for the iPhone, the iPad, Mac, as well as AirPods, playing a key role in the transition to Apple Silicon. Now, the big question is, how will history judge Tim Cook, and what are the immediate challenges that John Ternus would have to grapple with? Well, a little bit about the company and its new CEO and the one going out. The longtime CEO inherited Apple, that's Tim Cook we are talking about, at a market capitalization of $350 billion and oversaw it hitting a $4 trillion valuation. Now, Tim Cook introduced larger and smaller iPads, more types of iPhones, AirPods and Apple Watch, and a host of online services. Now, Cook has had his share of mishits as well. Now, the Apple Maps launch, the failed launch of an Air Power wireless charging mat, an unsuccessful decade-long quest to make a self-driving car, and the company found itself lagging miserably in the AI race as well. Now, though none of these really turned into a sort of crisis that could prevent Apple from becoming the most valuable company in the United States of America for most of the last few years. Now, to discuss what lies ahead for John Ternus and Apple, we have with us joining today the founding partner of Chrysalis Capital, Barnik Chitran Maitra. Barnik, thank you so much for your time. Big boots really to fill for John Ternus. One, of course, are the biggest boots, some would call, of them all, which is Steve Jobs himself. And then, of course, Tim Cook, who has steered the company for about 15 years or so. Now, some would credit Steve Jobs to be the innovator and Tim Cook to be the operational supply chain mastermind. What is John Ternus' specialty?
Now, John Ternus, as you pointed out, is actually the hardware engineer. So I think Apple returns to someone who's actually hardware engineering background and fundamental engineer. If you look at the founders, the original founder had the two Steves, where Steve Jobs was actually the visionary and the marketeer, and Steve Wozniacki was actually the engineer. I think what Tim Cook did remarkably well was to take what Steve Jobs had created and optimized the hell out of it to create a lot of shareholder value. Because under his tenure, the Apple stock, as you mentioned, has grown more than 10 times, whereas the revenue and earnings may have grown only 4, 5 to 6 times. So I think this was an entire era of optimization, of creating value and delivering returns. I think, as you put it, how will Tim Cook be remembered by? I think today he will be remembered very favorably based on the impact he has. But if you fast forward 10 or 15 years out, it's ironic that his legacy will be defined more by decisions taken by John Ternus, particularly with regard to the AI wars and also to Apple's overexposure and overdependence on China, and how he manages to overcome some, what I would call these as timed landmines, which seem to have been very carefully put in his path, right? And how he deals with them will define it. But there is a lot of cautious optimism that John Ternus is his own man. He is not a supply chain or an operations background person. As you mentioned, he's actually engineered the biggest transition Apple has done, which is the transition to Apple Silicon, which is not an easy transition. And also, as a person, he is quite different from Tim Cook. I think individually, Tim Cook is a hiker. He's a patient listener. John Ternus on the side is actually a race car enthusiast and a racing enthusiast. He actually spends his weekends tinkering over go-karts in his garage. So I think there's hope that beyond being someone who keeps the wheels running and the lights on, he will do enough tinkering to move Apple towards the new age.
I'll pick up from the racing car analogy and the example that you've given. An Apple car, autonomous car, self-driving cars was one of the big highlights that Tim Cook was really focused on in the early part of his tenure at the helm of Apple. Do you think under John Ternus, a hardware guy, a racing car enthusiast himself, will he steer the company back into that abandoned project of self-driving cars?
No, I think the self-driving cars project Titan, I think that ship has sailed. I think there are several other players who've taken the lead with Waymo, and now actually Tesla announcing the expansion of its robotaxi program to several cities outside the pilot city.
Okay.
So I don't think it's getting back to the self-driving car, but there is a moment right now to step up and play in the AI race, and the kind of valuation premium Apple commands. They're amongst the top 2 or 3 stocks in the Max 7 when you look at multiples on forward earnings.
Right.
I think that will disappear if Apple is viewed as not an innovative company, but an utility who's just providing access to its consumers for advanced AI models.
All right, and let us talk about that advanced AI models, because that is, of course, a moat that Apple has not been able to create. And if anything, one would call Siri has been pretty much a failed experiment, even as Apple was among the early sort of users, adopters, builders of artificial intelligence. Does Apple, under John Ternus, have what it takes to build an artificial intelligence moat to protect its future interests?
So I think right now it's not about building a moat, but it's playing catch up. I think Apple has already lost the training wars, right? I think right now Apple has shifted its focus on what's called the inference wars, which is how can you give a human-like experience from Siri to Apple consumers in terms of reasoning, in terms of logic, in terms of responding to queries. I think the innovation with Siri has failed. I think there should be a collective responsibility of the full Apple leadership for taking its eye off Siri in general, because remember, Siri was a breakthrough assistant. The original AI assistant was Siri, and then now Siri is nowhere. So coming back to, does John Ternus have it in him to get Apple to where it takes? Please note that Steve Jobs is going nowhere. He's still going to remain as executive chairman
Tim Cook.
of the company.
Tim Cook, you mean?
Tim Cook is going nowhere. He's going to continue to remain as the executive chairman. So I don't think there'll be a lot of independent decision making early on. But let's wait for some John Ternus moments to see what decisions he takes. And he will be confronted with some crisis, as most early CEOs do, pretty early in his tenure. And how he responds and the amount of autonomy given to him by Tim Cook as he shapes the response. And then how does he drive fundamental change in the leadership by elevating either fresh faces with fresh ideas or attracting fresh senior talent into Apple, which Apple has not done for over a decade. I think if you look at the last remarkable senior hires who were pulled into Apple, Tim Cook was one of them in 97, 98 by Jobs and a few late guys. But in the Tim Cook era, you've not seen a lot of very senior industry veterans being attracted to Apple and being successful at Apple. So a lot of things to work on, right? So I think let's be cautiously optimistic. Apple is a beloved icon and evokes a lot of emotion amongst its faithful users. But I think the challenge for Apple is to remain relevant in the AI wars, and right now they are not.
Absolutely. Relevance or leadership, what will define the next era of growth for Apple? Barnik Chitran Maitra, thank you so much for your time. And with that, we will slip into a short break. When we come back, can an artificial intelligence bot be charged with murder? We'll bring you that story on the other side.